The original Korg Minilogue was released a little under 5 years ago, and despite being seemingly supplanted by a new version, the original holds its value really well. That's for very good reason. The Korg Minilogue is an analog 4-voice polyphonic synthesizer with a lot of hands-on control and a ton of features. I got mine secondhand from a friend, and so I got a pretty good discount on it, but knowing what I know now, I probably would have happily paid full price for it. Getting a synth like this without having to sell your soul is a pretty good deal. It's got 2 voltage-controlled oscillators with a bunch of different shapes. They can talk to each other. You can have some sync going on between them, mix the signals, a pretty solid filter that I really like the sound of, some decent, although not crazy in-depth modulation options, and a bunch of ways to actually play the thing, such as a polyphonic mode, unison, chords, arps, etc. And it's got a built-in delay. I'm going to get into a bunch of that stuff hands-on in a little bit here, but let's go beyond the spec sheet for a second. This thing just sounds really nice. As you hopefully heard from that demo, the Minilogue sits in a really nice spot between kind of vintage and old school and modern and pristine. It's got a bit of a reputation for sounding slightly on the bright, harsh, and even a little bit metallic side, but it definitely does not have to sound like that. It's got a pretty good range of sounds. I like it for kind of old school, very obviously analog stuff, and it's quite nice for that, whether you're making old school synthwave or some Kid Cudi inspired space trap. All that being said, let me quickly jump into the synth itself. Hands-on, give you a little demonstration of some of the stuff it's capable of. This is my Minilogue. I haven't bothered taking the stickers off of it from the previous owner. But this is not meant to be a super in-depth tutorial. This is just meant to be a quick walkthrough of what's on this thing. So first of all, your 2 voltage-controlled oscillators, in other words, analog sound sources with kind of the standard wave shapes you'd be expecting. This oscillator, the second oscillator, can modulate the first one if you make that happen, either through sync or ring modulation. So this is an initialized patch, the saw wave. Pretty standard. Let me make sure both of these are up. This is the mixer between the 2 oscillators. And you'll notice this little graphic readout thing here. That's actually really nice to have. A little bit of visual feedback. So here's sync off. There's just some normal phase cancellation happening. Here's sync on. Change the depth. And you can also change the pitch envelope of this second oscillator as well, which is where you get that effect. Ring is now on. Some pretty wild effects you can get out of this. And then also there is technically a third oscillator. That is the noise oscillator, which is actually super useful for really bringing sounds to life. For instance, let me turn these back up. Just have one oscillator here. Throw this into unison, turn the noise down a bit. Let's demonstrate the filter. Two different modes. Crank the resonance. I like that one a little better. It's a little gentler. You also have key tracking enabled if you want it. At various settings here. And also velocity tracking. So the harder you hit keys, the more the filter opens. I'm going to turn that off for now. And then, of course, you got your filter envelope. This is all pretty standard, but I love how every single function has its own button or switch or knob. So without the noise, with the noise. And if I kick on ARP, not quite the effect I'm going for. Let me adjust this a little bit. Here's the really important thing to know. The EG has its own controls for ADSR. For controlling, say, the filter, you're going to want to dive in here, and these act independently of each other. I'll click on one of the other modes. Go up a little bit. And of course you have like octave controls of the oscillators. Like everything in here is really cleverly laid out. It's pretty deceptively simple, but there's a lot of control you have in here. The LFO is a little simpler than I'd like. I'm used to the Arturia Microfreak's pretty in-depth mod matrix. This is not that, but it is pretty nice for what you get. So let me show you what's involved here. First of all, wave types. You got 3. And I gotta actually send this to something. Let's just do pitch. Easy to hear. So this is how much. Right? You can almost get in a little bit of FM territory. Triangle wave. Square wave. And you can mod that as well. Or just turn that off. So this controls multiple things, which is interesting. So the other 2 things that you can send the LFO to are shape. Turn that a little bit. And cutoff. This also has a built-in delay. Typically at this point, I like to process stuff in post or use some kind of outboard effects, but it is really nice to have, especially to get sounds to ring out a little bit more. So let me get that going. And you can change how it's routed. So right now it's bypassed. You can have it be before the filter or after the filter. The feedback's too much. So if we turn the time down, but turn the feedback up, it becomes reverb-esque in nature. Let me get rid of this LFO. Just have a sound that rings out a bit. Kick this into unison, maybe. That's obviously fairly abrasive, but hopefully you get the idea. And real quick, I want to run through a few presets, just so you can get even more of an idea of what the range of this thing is. And of course, there are plenty of user preset slots as well. So you can see how powerful the polyphony is on this thing. Like there are only 4 voices, so you want to be careful with letting notes bleed into each other because eventually they'll start to cut each other off. That cut off the first note, for instance. But you can take it pretty far. And there are a bunch of voice modes that I should mention. You've seen unison, you've seen the ARP. There's also a chord mode, which is nice to have. You can hear each chord cuts off the previous one. Let me get to a different preset. Some deep basses. This is getting into the more harsh territory. Also have a pitch slider. This is in the ARP territory. That's a lot of fun. And you can even create some chaos. A lot of really classic analog stuff. Some stuff that engages the filter a bit more. And some fairly massive sounds, and imagine putting this through distortion after the fact. And I should mention one of my favorite tricks with this thing, really subtle pitch automation. This thing is clearly impressive, especially for the price and for the size, and that's why it stacks up so well against some of its more modern contemporaries. And of course, haven't mentioned this yet, I do think it sounds nice. And its sound can really be unlocked if you pair it with some effects plugins or an external effects unit. Overall, this synth fits really nicely into my studio as something that goes out of its way to remind you that it's analog but still sounds quite clean. It's a good all-arounder whether you're using it for recording, for sequenced jamming, or for live keyboard playing. Its price is a cut below what you would see as like a flagship synth, so it's fairly easy to recommend. And it's got huge sound for its small size. I'm going to leave you with one more little synth jam, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit. I messed it up.